too nerdy for you, so the kinds of games we'll play today might surprise you. But I feel like I'm here to kind of give the rebuttal to some of the stuff that you talked about on Monday. So what I was told is that on Monday you shared experiences often with your parents or your teachers in terms of conflicts over games that you've played. And I think you've taken a look at a lot of the common rhetoric about games. And so I hope that you'll participate and just shout out, and I apologize because I don't know your names, but I'll just try to point to you. But please participate, it makes it a lot more fun. I should also say who I am, I guess. You've already kind of heard this, but I'm new here, and so if you see me wandering the halls, you can just stop and say hello to me, or stop by Austin 211. My office is the first office by the main English office. And my door is often open, so if you want to just pop in sometime to talk video games, I'm always happy. And in fact, my students are the ones that usually tell me about new games that I haven't heard of because I don't have time to play as much anymore. So my name is Alenda Chang, and as you've probably been told, the book that I'm working on right now is actually about video games, but actually about video games and ecology. So believe it or not, I'm trying to meld these areas you wouldn't normally put together. And if there's time, I'll talk about my work, but I really want to get to some broader questions about games. So just fill me in a little bit for the Monday stuff. What games did you guys talk about? What were kind of the sources of conflict? Just give me a little bit of info here so I'm not completely sort of out of the loop. Anybody? Yeah, thanks.
I talked about Grand Theft Auto 5.
I figured that would come in. There is a 5. I'm so behind. And which mythical city is 5 in?
Los Santos.
Los Santos? So is it supposed to be Los Angeles or?
I think so, yes.
Okay, because I know there was San Francisco, San Andreas or whatever.
Yeah.
All right, so I think GTA is one of those lightning rod games, right? Because it has the potential for physical violence against other people, as well as personal property and against, law enforcement, right? So you've had conflicts over that, but GTA is a game that a lot of academics have written about and studied. Believe it or not, there are plenty of young people that play that game and don't slap anybody or gun anyone down. And they actually, inner city youth they've studied actually use the game to learn how to mod cars. Have you ever done that or spent a good amount of time in the game just doing that or doing something that wasn't about sort of normal objectives? And then I know there have been reports in the media about that game, about how parents actually played it with their very young children. And it was actually okay because all they did was the games where you try to put out fires using the fire truck, sort of more civic participation and not about gunning people down or running people over and that sort of thing. So even games that get a really bad rap have this potential to be played in other ways. What else did you guys talk about other than GTA? Yeah.
Assassin's Creed.
Oh, okay. The most recent one or kind of older ones? Or, and that is kind of a violent game. But did you make the argument that you're learning about history?
I mean, I'm interested in the history aspect. I know a lot of people who play it aren't.
That do play it what?
A lot of people who play it aren't. But.
Oh, okay, right. But the most recent one, just for people who don't know, takes place in what period and place?
It's, I actually haven't done those, but
oh, okay.
But it's pirates and probably the Taiwan pirate, privateers.
But there are others that sort of take place in like post-revolutionary era America, Boston, and other things. And so there's this idea that you can actually learn about history by participating in that history. Granted, yes, as some superpowered person from the future that's like an assassin, but you can't pick everything to be perfect, right? Anything else that you guys wanted to share? So these were blockbuster, kind of AAA mainstream games. Nobody talked about Farmville or something like that? Okay, well, I have an entire chapter that I've written about farm games, so maybe I'll geek out about that. But here I am. I'm here to present a defense of games and to think about games not just as entertainment and fluff. So I don't want you to just dismiss them and say, it's just a game, who cares, right? Let's not worry about this. Or demonize them and say games are awful. It's like rock and roll or hula hoops, or it's going to destroy our youth and lead to childhood obesity and diabetes and fail antisocial adolescents that just stay in their mother's basement for the rest of their lives, right? So one of the possible defenses, I'm sorry if you can't see this, but we could do the whole games as art defense. What do you think that might be? And I don't know if you looked at the Roger Ebert thing, but there's a whole debate about whether or not games can be art. Does anybody have strong feelings about this? Or whether or not, whether or not games might actually qualify as art? Yeah.
I think some games can be classified as art because some games are like very visually appealing and tough to make, and also some tell like really in-depth stories.
Okay, great. Actually, you're anticipating my next one. And this is one where these two kind of bleed into each other, but I do want to talk about games as narrative, right? And especially since, actually, I don't know how many of you are English majors. Are you mostly English majors, or are you from sort of all, oh, okay. I was going to say, for those of you who are Englishy, right, the second one might be particularly important to you to see that there's some relevance between literature and games. But for now, let's look at games as art. So, you may or may not have known about this, but the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C. this past year actually opened an exhibit on the art of video games. And so this is not just, a pokey little museum in the middle of nowhere that decided to do this kooky thing and have, a museum exhibit devoted to video games. This is the Smithsonian, and this is the museum dedicated to American art, right? And so if you walk around the American Art Museum, most of the stuff that's hanging in there is stuff that we think of as paintings, like fancy oil paintings in frames, right? Portraits of people that are long dead, right? And so this is very unusual to think about this. And I can show you a few of the pictures. I took a whole bunch of pictures because I actually went there to do some research. Hang on, sometimes it does weird things. All right, so out of all video games, the curator had to pick the ones that he wanted to share with people to make them actually playable. And he divided it into 5 different eras, starting from somewhere in the 70s up until today. And then also allowed people to vote online, and millions of people from around the world voted for their favorite games. What games do you think might have made it in? If you had only 5 games to kind of represent the art of video games across about the past 40 years. And there's sort of one for each generation. What do you think might be a classic? And you might be able to see this already, but yeah.
The Legend of Zelda.
Oh yeah, actually I'm sure that was way up there, but it didn't make it in. But I'm sure a lot of people voted for that because the franchise is just so popular. Yeah. Yeah. Did you actually see it there?
No.
Yeah, see? Ta-da! So they had these kiosks where people could go up, line up and play, but then, so they wanted to prevent people from hogging the kiosk for more than a few minutes, so after a few minutes it stops and restarts so that you let somebody else kind of get in there. So Pac-Man was one. I'm surprised somebody hasn't picked this one yet, but instead of Legend of Zelda, anybody recognize this? Super Mario, right? This is one of those, it's a kind of a bad picture, right? But the world of Super Mario was another. This may have been before your time, but The Secret of Monkey Island is another classic that was in here. And then when we get into the more modern day, one of the games that I actually write about is this one. No, not this one, I'm sorry. I apologize because it can be hard to see. It's this one. Is a game called Flower on PlayStation Network. Has anybody ever seen that or heard of it? Oh, wow, I'm surprised. You've heard of it, but you haven't played it, right?
I've never played it.
Okay, most people think it's a very hippy-dippy game because you play as the wind and you just kind of soar over the landscape and visit flowers, right? Most hardcore gamers that I know start to ask immediately, when do we start shooting things, right? So maybe we'll see a trailer for this. Did you have it?
I played it once.
Oh, you played it? What did you think?
It's pretty fun, actually.
Oh, It's some people actually classify it as a meditation game or as a Zen game. And then I think the other game that I can't find an image for is Myst, right? Which is another kind of famous one. But the idea that we're getting to the point where you can actually have games in museums and being celebrated for their aesthetic qualities is an interesting one. And then there are these debates over what counts as aesthetic merit. So some people say, well, until a game makes you cry, it's not art, right? Has anybody ever cried playing a game? You can, you know, be manly and still cry over a game. Don't be afraid, right? Nobody's going to admit it, right? But it's one of those things where we regularly probably read novels or watch movies and tear up, right? But you feel emotionally invested. For instance, has anybody played Heavy Rain before? I think that one is very emotionally affecting. What about The Walking Dead?
The
Yeah.
game or the show?
What's that?
The game or the show?
Oh, no, the game. But there are moments in that game where very traumatic things happen, and you know, there are famous YouTube videos of people freaking out over things that have happened in the narrative, right? So you can get very invested in games. So moving on, so this is just one potential defense. I also think a lot of people have been working to say that games are a narrative medium of a new kind. So what do I mean by narrative? Just generally speaking. And since I now know that you guys aren't necessarily English majors, this might not be sort of second nature for you to think about, but you know, when we say narrative, what is that? What is a synonym that's just very easy? Yeah.
The story?
Yeah, a story. It's a plot, right? Believe it or not, academics get really feisty sometimes, and in the late 90s when our field of game studies was starting, we had kind of a turf war between a group called the ludologists, which is a fancy term, which I'll explain in a second. There was kind of like a sharks and jets thing going on between the ludologists and the narratologists. And basically, the ludologists were people that were arguing that games are unique and that they're different from other kinds of media, right? So if you tell a story in a game, they were interested in figuring out what was specific to the medium of games. And they didn't want to compare it to film or to literature or any other kind of thing. And then narratologists were people who saw games as just kind of extending storytelling from earlier media. So there's nothing necessarily radically new about it. It's just we tell stories in whatever media that we use, right? So we've done it through speech, we've done it through stories, we've done it through film. And so why not use the terms from literary theory or from film theory or whatever to talk about games, right? So we kind of had this interesting kind of battle. And now I think people realize that it's a little bit too extreme to say it's just one or the other, and actually both are important. So, just given this really brief outline, do you guys have any sort of feelings about, well, I never thought about games as potentially being their own unique storytelling medium. Do you think that they're just like going to see a movie or maybe reading a book? I think about the holodeck in Star Trek, right? Where do games fall in this continuum, or do you think it's if it is different, what makes it different? Yeah.
I think it's different because like you kind of invest like a lot more time in it than you would like a movie.
Right.
And then you also like for a lot of games you have your own like personal morals reflected on it too.
Oh, interesting.
So like
Okay.
because you control like a lot of the things that happen around you. So there are a lot of games where you can choose like what to do.
Right, exactly. So I think you're already pointing at one of the major differences that people point to would be interaction or participation, right? So, no matter what you do with a book, right, you could argue that it is participatory because you are sort of involved in identifying with the characters. You could pick up a book and you could go to the park and read it. You can read it at home in a lounge chair or whatever. But ultimately, you're just reading something that somebody already wrote, right? Basically, your only choice is, do I read it or do I not? Right? I can ride this train or I can get off. But I can't really do much with the narrative as it stands. And same with the movie, right? You can sit, you can watch the movie, you can get up and walk out, but you can't stand up in the middle of, her and say, I hate this. Can we do something else, right? Like, can we just kind of rewind and redo that scene over, right? But instead in games, you have a lot of control over where the narrative develops, right? In some games, there are actually totally different endings depending on what choices you make, right, throughout the game. It's kind of like Clue, right? But games are more radical in that sense. So the participation, the interaction, and the control that you have over the narrative. Anything else kind of occur to you? I think that's the major one. Can anyone think of a game where the narrative actually had a branching structure and you actually had a very strong influence over where the game went? Yeah, oh, 2 hands. Nantucket, I'm sorry.
Fable.
Oh, Fable. Okay, I have not actually played, but can you describe it just for?
Yeah, it's there's a bar, good and evil, and what you do determines if you're good or evil, and then you can do different quests if you're good or if you're evil.
Right, so that's kind of a classic Dungeons and Dragons kind of role-playing thing where you have an alignment toward good or evil, right? So clearly, if you tend toward the evil, maybe your quest will not be about saving maidens and restoring world peace, right? But instead, it will be about sowing chaos and kind of causing problems, right? So that's a really good example. What was yours?
Dishonored.
Oh, Dishonored. Okay. Can you also describe that? Because I don't want to assume everybody knows.
I've actually never beaten the game, but from what I understand, you have 2 different endings. One is if you play through like kind of stealthily and like maybe only killing the people that you have to.
Right.
And the other one is if
Economy.
you go guns blazing, just murder everyone.
Wow. Okay. And so there are 2 different endings.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, I love that you actually admitted that I've never finished it because I think most of us have had that experience if you play any kind of console game, right? Nowadays, games are so huge and they're so time-consuming that who has time to search out every little possibility and actually get to the end, right? And you know, the people that do it, I feel like they have to take a week off of school or work and just basically binge play for 40 hours straight to get to the end. And who can do that necessarily these days? So that's an interesting thing now, right? So if games are a narrative medium of the contemporary day, and most people don't actually finish games, are we placing too much emphasis on story though, right? Because you just find out about it by reading the web, right? Or reading reviews, or reading how other players have done walkthroughs, right? And is that different from other stuff? I mean, maybe you guys don't read, you don't actually finish any of the novels that you start. That would hurt me as a literature professor, but is that something that's distinctly different about games, where it's just kind of like you get to go into a world and play around for a while, but then it doesn't really matter if you get to the very end, right? Anybody have an experience like this? And then I think it's interesting right now that actually a lot of the guys are speaking up, and you guys are clearly, experienced, right, with games. The girls are being a little quieter. Is that because you guys don't play games, or not to put you on the spot, but I'm just curious. Do you guys play games, or is it not, or do you not play games at all? Or different kinds of games? Anybody willing to speak to that? Yeah, please. Thanks.
Personally, I don't play any video games.
Do you have siblings that play or friends that play? Wow, so you've led a life kind of sheltered from video games, right? And is it a conscious choice that you made, or just because you have other things that you prefer?
Yeah, I guess just never interested in things.
Okay, all right, and I totally respect that, right? Yeah.
I'm not really a big fan of like most of the games with guns, but I grew up with 3 boys living next door, so I'm exposed to like Halo, Call of Duty, Mass Effect, like Fallout, whatever. But before I got to college, I played off more often. And I used to play like Minecraft a lot.
Right, yeah.
And,
Which is a very different type of game, right?
Yeah,
Because it's a
there's
sandbox where you just kind of get to do whatever you want.
and like Roller Coaster Tycoon.
You're not my first student who's been really into Roller Coaster Tycoon, actually.
Sims, like Sims 2. is my
Right.
favorite.
They actually did a study about, I think it was about 5 years ago, where they surveyed teenage boys and teenage girls, and they kind of figured out what the top 3 games were for those populations. So when you looked at the number 1 for each category, it seemed very predictable, because it was, for the guys, it was Grand Theft Auto, whatever the current iteration was, and for the girls, it was The Sims. And the thing about The Sims is, people often describe it as virtual dollhouse play. It's like playing with dolls, right? Except they're all virtual. But, if you looked at just the number 1, it seemed like it was telling a really strong gender story. But if you looked at number 2 for the girls was Grand Theft Auto. right? So I think we have to be really suspicious of kind of saying, girls, prefer to do this, or guys prefer to do the shooting and gunning down, or whatever. And a lot of the really early writing on games that was really interesting was actually about gender and, how can we get girls to participate and, games for girls. And so there's this great collection called From Barbie to Mortal Kombat, right? Which talks about gender in computer games. And I think I might have actually given you one of the games out here. There was actually a company called Purple Moon that Brenda Laurel tried to start to make games for girls. And unfortunately, it didn't do very well and ended up closing down after just a few years, right? So we have to kind of ask this question, is the contemporary game industry still really designed around an imagined audience of men, right? Or is it expanding? And I would actually argue, to go back to the Farm Bill, that it is expanding, right? And if you look at the statistics, well, let me backtrack. When people kind of invoke the stereotypical gamer, like, what does that person look like? How old are they? Where do they live? That kind of thing. I'm talking about just the stigma, right? The stereotype of gamers. Nobody wants to call anyone. No. Is it like a 50-year-old? Nobody has this, really. Maybe there is no stigma. That would make me very happy. But I think when you read things in the media, generally it's like kind of prepubescent males living in their mother's basements who haven't seen the light of day and who knows how long, right? So there's that kind of stereotype, right? Also that the gamer is very antisocial, so it has poor socialization skills, right? Is out of touch with reality, is uber violent, right? I know you guys focused a lot on the discussions of linking games to violence. And maybe you already discussed this a little bit, but do you put a lot of stock in that? I mean, do you feel like if you play Call of Duty that the next day you are going to go out and mow a whole group of people down at Store Center, at Price Chopper? Right? So, I mean, I think that most gamers kind of acknowledge or they would like for the world to give them some credit to distinguish between fiction and reality, right? Or between entertainment and between your personal motivations, right? And we could talk about that further if that's something that's interesting to you. So there's this games as art, games as narrative, and then the last one I thought I would just throw up here is games for social change. So there's actually a conference and a website and center and all sorts of things for games for change. And sometimes they call this serious games. So do you think that's already just a ridiculous term or a paradox? Is there anything about that term serious games that seems weird to you? Yeah.
Could you give an example of
Sure. Actually, that's perfect. I will have somebody come up and play. So I want to show you this game. Can you hear anything? I hear a buzz. Let me try refreshing. Oh, it's muted. Oh no.
Sorry, what you can turn it on top, it's like off.
Oh, it's hard to see?
Yeah, it's very bright.
I kind of wonder if this is actually the audio recorder. I can turn the lights off. But I'm wondering why there's no sound. Okay, well, we'll just kind of go with it for now. So this is a game called September 12th. The previous screen called it a toy world. And so this is it. This is all you get for instructions. If you can't read it, basically, okay, this is a terrorist. These are civilians. It says, this is not a game. You can't win and you can't lose. It's a simulation. The rules are deadly simple. You can shoot or not, okay? And this is a simple model you can use to explore some aspects of the war on terror. So does anybody want to come up and just try it out? It's very, very simple controls, so. Anybody. I swear, it's really just one button. You click or you don't. Scroll around. Yeah, thank you. Come on down. It's like the Price is Right. Okay, so you can scroll back and forth, and then you just can press the button. So imagine that there is sound. I'm not sure what's going on with that.
I think just the screen.
Oh, jeez.
Okay, I might have muted right when that was happening. What happened?
It shot like a missile. I was aiming for a terrorist, but it knocked down.
Okay, so what's your name, by the way?
Yeah.
Raj. Okay, so Raj is trying to follow. Well, the instructions don't actually say shoot a terrorist, right? It just kind of says here are some profiles, do what you will, right? So you were aiming for one of the people with the white headscarf or
Yeah.
head covering,
Yeah.
but what happened?
It was bigger than I expected.
Okay, so the kind of impact was bigger than
Yeah.
expected, and you guys that are watching help out here. So try to observe what's actually happening when missiles hit. Okay, so if you might need to fire a few more for people to observe. Is anybody noticing what's happening? Yeah, I don't know why the sound doesn't work. Does anybody notice? It would be easier if you could hear the sound, I guess, but.
Yeah, they were like crying and stuff.
Oh, I see it's on the mic.
Steps around.
Okay, well, maybe I can just hold the mic up to the speakers or something. All right, so what's happening is he's firing, and then it's very hard to actually get your target if you're aiming for a terrorist. And what happens is there's usually a few bodies, and then people run to the scene and they cry, and then that little boo 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 is accompanying what? The people that are crying at the site end up turning into more terrorists, right? So they turn from being civilians to terrorists. Do you see what's happening? So there's definitely, first of all, collateral damage, and then there's this conversion. All right, so what happens, thank you, that's great. You can choose to shoot or not shoot. So what if we just kind of sit here and don't do anything? It doesn't seem like anything is happening, but. Perhaps it's because there was too much carnage. But eventually, what actually does happen is that some of the people who are terrorists end up returning to civilian status, and then the buildings eventually get rebuilt, right? So the game isn't just in a steady state, it's actually will repair itself over time. So maybe this seems a little heavy-handed, but what do you think is sort of the message of this game? Anybody want to venture a reading? And it's called September 12th, so I think it's clearly a response to the events of September 11th, right? Yeah, thanks.
It's saying that the intervention that we had was just making more of a problem than what we started.
Right, exactly. So it is, even though it claims not to take any particular position, it seems like it's condemning retaliation as a strategy, right? So the idea of an eye for an eye seems to have severe limitations because rather than solving the problem, it makes the problem larger, right? At least this is what the game seems to say. But the interesting thing about this is that the game isn't saying this. It's not like there is a big block of text that we read that says, this is what the game is about, right? What we're inferring from is actually through the gameplay, you're kind of figuring out what is the game saying, right? So I want to show you one other thing, and maybe some of you have played this. Has anybody ever played Animal Crossing? Yeah. Wow, great. Okay. So I thought I would just play a little bit of the trailer for the new 3DS, the new Leaf version. Sorry, the music, you'll just have to hear it from my computer. Is this taking you guys back to some? Okay, so those of you who actually have played this game, or you might not have played this particular version of it, how would you describe the game? I think there were at least two of you that raised your hand. Yeah, so.
Well, I never played this one, but basically, well, this one said you were there, but in the other one, you like just move. You're like a person and you move into this town.
Populated by little
By
like
animals.
woodland animals, right? Cute.
And that raccoon Tom Nook employs you, and he renovates your house, and you like have to do little chores around town, and you can like design your house with the furniture he sells, and like go fishing.
So it seems pretty innocent, right? Because the things that you do seem very rustic and wholesome, right? You can go fishing, you can catch butterflies and collect nuts and stuff like that, right? It seems very, and you know, the graphics themselves are very charming and kind of like, you know, everything has giant heads, so it's just cute, right? Is that what you're gonna say?
It kind of like, there was a deep message, I guess, that I got like later on.
Really?
I looked back on it, it was like, the game was always trying to like keep you involved because every time you like finally paid off your debt to the guy, he's like, oh, we made you a new house, now you owe me another like $1,000.
Whether or not you chose that?
Yeah, it's just like you could try and say no, and he's like, oh, I know, this, I built it.
That's hilarious. Okay, so one of the kind of professors that writes about this at Georgia Tech actually wrote about Animal Crossing because his 5-year-old was playing Animal Crossing. And he thought, oh, this is great, it's fine, my 5-year-old's playing this, it's a cute game, right? But then as he was looking closer at the game, he thought, oh my gosh, this game is really teaching my son to be a better capitalist, to be a better consumer, right? Because it's actually about how do you manage debt, right? It's like having a mortgage, right? It's, you know, a 5-year-old learning about what it's like to be in the mortgage system because it's all about buying things and kind of upgrading your home and making it bigger and having nicer furnishings, right? So I don't know if you saw the reference, but there's a reference to bells, right? And bells aren't just, you know, actual bells, but they're the currency in the universe, so everything has a cost. And in order to buy nice things, you need to kind of complete jobs for other people or go gather things and sell them. And the other kind of crazy thing is you mentioned Tom Nook is basically your merchant or your broker that sort of helps upgrade your home and you sell things to him and you buy things from him. But he has his own house, right? And what does his house start looking like and how does it sort of end? Or what happens to his house while you're upgrading your house? Yeah.
It starts off as a shack, and then it's like a little store, and then it goes to like a giant department store.
Right, exactly. So, and do you think it's like an equal step with the upgrading of your own home, or is it sort of even more dramatic of a change?
It's more exaggerated.
Exactly. Okay, so does that strike you as like a kind of kooky, like accurate description of capital? Because the people that own that have capital and have the sort of can afford to invest in resources and equipment and real estate are making more money than you are, right, by transacting with them. So it's just crazy. It's like a game that seems very innocent and lovely, and it's really about how do you accumulate and manage debt and become a better shopper, right? Be a good consumer. And this doesn't have it, but I know one of the trailers actually has a screenshot that says, I just want a cowhide rug and I'll be happy, right? So there are these phrases like, if I can just have that one item, my life will be complete, sort of thing. Okay. Let me just show you a few other games so we can try to get a sense of the potential for games. So Congregate is just a site where you can play a bunch of free games. Has anybody ever played this game before? The McDonald's video game by Mole Industria, which is an Italian art collective. Anybody ever seen this? Okay, so I'm gonna invite someone to come up and play this. Anybody? How about one of my quiet people over here? Anybody? All the way in the back? You wanna try?
Chris.
Who is that? Somebody's nominating someone else. Would one of you guys mind coming down? Somebody who hasn't said anything? Just try it. So shy. Performance anxiety of like. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so notice this little thing about McDonald's. It's a digital parody, not affiliated with McDonald's. I'm sure they had to put that up there for copyright. So, all right, go ahead and check it out. You can just take over. And I'm sorry the music is not going to be super loud.
Straight to the game.
Wait, I played this game before.
I will give you a hint. There are 4 different windows, but you need to probably farm and set up some counts.
Okay.
All right, so you're running McDonald's right now. Yeah, you guys could shout out. It's kind of like collective play.
Go to the headquarters. Go to the man.
So we're at McDonald's headquarters. So those little yellow circles are your options. You mouse over them. Let's see.
Come on, yeah. Beat it. You have to put more
Okay, so the cow goes in and the patties come out, right? But he's upset with you right now. He's going, because you don't have any cows, so you need to go to the agriculture window and raise some cows. Right?
Yeah.
A lot of cats.
Look at open space.
Yeah, click that.
Look at open space. Nice and cows. Yeah.
All right, and they'll grow up eventually. Right? All
Well, I
right.
played like fifth grade, so.
You played this before?
So yes.
Go to the sandwich. Click the
Yes,
sandwich.
you know. click
All right,
that.
so we haven't seen this window yet. This is McDonald's. You might not want to go to McDonald's after playing this, like just at least right away.
Click like one of the
The
registers.
guy oh my god.
All right, so you need people to man the register, right? So if you hire an employee,
And then in the back, you have to like.
hire some line workers.
Yeah.
All right, so you've got customers coming, and someone's making burgers in the back. And right now they're smiling, right? So just keep an eye on their expressions.
See, we need more cows.
You basically have to like.
Yeah, the
keep
cow
making
window is
cows.
flashing, so he's still anxious.
Yo, he's still calling you.
Need more cows. No.
Nope, okay.
Yeah, if you sell them, they'll just be gone. They just have to raise more cows.
Okay. There you go.
So once they get fat enough, they get harvested and sent to
Go harvest that stuff. That's fries.
Where's the other stuff? You have to corrupt the sand.
It'll automatically happen too. Wow, someone's saying you have to corrupt the
It
what?
says it on the bottom. So you
Yeah.
mouse over that one. Then you have to
Oh,
kill something.
there it
There you
goes.
go.
You have to grab this.
Wait, I think you can add cows to like each one. Like click the marker.
That.
Click the plus sign. Yeah.
That's where.
So you can see, right, so far there doesn't seem to be anything ethically reprehensible, right? You're doing okay, you're making a profit slightly, right? You still don't have enough cows. Was the guy's expression still happy? I couldn't see.
Oh.
Maybe imagine you need more people, bro.
You need to hire real men. Is this stressful? The idea of running this? Okay, there you go.
Yo, all three.
Yeah.
You guys are the future corporate directors of America. I'm actually surprised you guys are doing pretty well. Most of my students play this and fail within the first probably 2 minutes because it's a really hard game to do well at. Okay, so you have cows, you're doing pretty well.
Wait, get rid of one of your cash registers.
So your sales are down.
Wait, what's up?
Yeah, you have to like
Fire?
yeah, fire one.
No problem, right? Who cares?
Your line workers, too.
Where's the butcher?
We need more cows.
Just kill, you have to kill yourself, yeah.
What?
Shoot him,
Have
yeah.
to kill that?
Destroy you.
Don't pick that one.
Wait, why did you know?
It
They're
died-
sick.
It died before you kill
Wait,
it.
shoot him quickly.
Yeah, shoot him quickly.
They're dying because.
No,
Oh,
shoot the cows.
no, take the cow and the gun. Yeah.
You know why they're dying? It's because I don't think they have enough food or something. That's why
You
they
gotta feed your
Oh yeah,
bro.
Oh my god, back to the farm! Back to the farm!
so much pressure. Right? Alright, so you need more soybean production, right? So you still have some unused land. It doesn't seem like too much of a problem. But do you see what's gonna happen? Eventually you're gonna have to do what?
Take out the village.
Yeah. So that's rainforest and that's an indigenous village, right? And that's also the city of Sao Jose, I think. So eventually, as you try to satisfy the demands of your burger empire, you have to make these kind of like morally reprehensible choices to expand into the rainforest and destroy whatever, right? And then in the butchering window, those of you who have played this before, what are some of your options to increase production? Right, sometimes you have sick cows, so you can eliminate them from the food supply, or you can
Throw them in there.
still throw them in there, right? Or you can feed them,
Dude, only 40
or you can feed them,
2,400.
you can feed them animal flour,
What?
right?
You think so?
Kill
You
the
know
cow.
$10.
Kill the cow.
You know profit.
We got headquarters.
Right.
Shoot the cow.
Shoot it.
So the one plot that had too many cows was getting kind of sickly because it was overcrowded, right? Uh-oh, we're going negative. We're going negative.
Not good. Oh.
Fire your
Oh my goodness.
I didn't do well.
No, you did great. You did great. Yay, thank you. So one of the fun things about this, when you watch these line workers for long enough, if you watch long enough, you'll actually see them sometimes spit into the food. I don't know if those of you who played it before, but they'll do that as well. And also, eventually, they kind of they lose their happy expression. This guy in the front is clearly not happy. So you have the option to kind of give him a pat on the back, like, give the employee a badge, right? Yay, you're employee of the month. Or give them a reprimand or fire them, right? So all of these things, so I think on one level, you guys know how to play the game to win the game or do better. But then, come on the like human being level, does this bug you at all? Or food production level?
Yeah.
Or are you totally fine with this? You're just,
I didn't like McDonald's anyway, so.
you didn't what?
I like stopped going to McDonald's a year ago. Like for.
Oh, so you decided, right, okay. So it's one of those things that kind of makes you think about the way that McDonald's is run. And Mole Industria always makes these games that sort of reflect on social and political issues. Another one that you might have heard of is Every Day the Same Dream, which is a reflection on what it's like to be like an office worker or a cubicle worker and kind of get up every day and do the same job, right? So it's a more philosophical game. Let me just show you one more game that's totally different. Anybody want to try this one? All you have to do is basically press the arrow keys and spacebar to play this one. Yeah, thanks. Great. What's your name? Sorry. Chris, come on down. We have to wait for that.
It's just this track where and Q and W control the eyes and
I love the shirt.
and the eyes are completely like
Okay.
spazzed out.
So this is a game called Take a Walk, and I'm not going to tell you anything about it.
Yeah. It's full of keys. It's all keys. And it's impossible to get over 5 minutes. It's impossible to get over 5 How do you
Just play around and see what happens. All right, so what are you guys noticing in the audience about this game? So why is the music stopping and starting?
When you start moving.
Right, so when you stop moving, the music cuts out. What about the score? What are you getting points for?
Play the music.
The notes, right? But what is this other thing that's next to the score? What's that?
It's a bird.
It's a bird, right? Okay. Right now you have 0 birds. No pressure.
Where are the birds?
Yeah, what?
You'll see.
You didn't walk fast.
What happens if you walk
Nice.
And there's no auto run on this. If you want to keep moving forward, you actually have to keep your finger holding the arrow key down, right? Oh, you just got a bird, so if you keep going, see there's a bird. Oh,
Oh, you lost.
okay, so what controls the presence of birds?
Not running the thing.
Right. So if you manage to kind of keep in this continuous flow where the music keeps going and you don't get interrupted or stopped, the birds kind of accumulate in the sky. But as soon as you get interrupted, they all fly away, right? So you got to the end of this level. And what did that landscape kind of look like?
Really, really bad.
Right, not so great, right? So now you're in the country, and it's getting better. Is this this is probably a game that's unlike stuff that you've played before, right? What kind of point do you think this game might be trying to make? And this music seems happier, right? It's right there in the title. What do you think Take a Walk means?
Just get away from everything.
Right, and you start out as a cubicle worker again, right?
Oh, there you go, you got this.
So there's a little bit of like you need to get into this flow, get outside. So I think it's an interesting game, right? Because it's all about, you actually have to get into a rhythm and sort of not let yourself be interrupted or distracted, right? Because you don't get rewarded for that.
His expression's getting better too.
Oh, is he? Yeah, is he starting to smile? All right, I think that's enough. Thanks, Chris. Very nice. Thank you for holding up under the intense scrutiny of the class and the pressure of like performing under scrutiny. All right, so I hope that I'm just trying to get a sense, or give you guys a sense that games can be something very different than what you might expect, right? And in my own work, which I don't probably have too much time to show you, I'm actually looking at games like this that kind of portray the human relationship to nature. So if you, I could point to a couple different studies, but just to go through really quickly. They've actually done studies in sociological journals that say that if you look at kids' picture books, that nature has basically disappeared in contemporary kids' nature books. So when you guys were kids, you might actually remember some of these titles, like Make Way for Ducklings, right? Or A Tree is Nice. But in the modern day, we have stuff like Truck, The Wall, or Blackout, which is actually about the blackout that happened in New York City not too many years ago. Right, so these authors basically figured out that it seems like nature is disappearing in kids' picture books, right? So where is it going, right? Is it basically going away because we're all starting to live in cities, or do you think that it might actually be in other media now, right? And I would argue that increasingly our experience of natural stuff is actually mediated by stuff like TLC, the Discovery Channel, National Geographic, right? Movies, nature documentaries, and games, right? So what does it mean that we're kind of doing things that are different like this? There's this author, Richard Louv, that basically says that you guys and a lot of the generations after you suffer from nature deficit disorder, so you don't get enough nature. And maybe since you guys live in Connecticut, almost the quiet corner, this doesn't feel like a very present problem for you, right? But the kind of question is, what are we getting instead? And somebody had mentioned Minecraft earlier, right? And I just put this as a joke, right? But in Minecraft, you get wood by doing what? Right, you have to punch trees, right? So, you know, you take that very literally, like, do we all need to go out and punch trees in order to harvest things? So in my work, I'm kind of looking, this is Titanfall, right? So I basically say most games nowadays are all about like eye candy, graphical spectacle, right? Really awesome graphics. Or they're about resource extraction. So if you've ever played an RTS genre game like Warcraft 3 or StarCraft, or you could argue some others, where it's all about mining gold and lumber and building cities and expanding your empire, right? These are the two dominant ways that we interact with natural things in games. So what happens when we start to get beyond that, beyond mining, right? This is World of Warcraft. And you know, in farm games, it's the same thing. It seems like, oh, you're playing a farm game, you're doing something wholesome, you're actually getting back to the land, right? But if you've ever played farm games, it's so ecologically irresponsible because you don't even have to water things, and you can magically unwither stuff. So if you forget to go back to your farm for 2 weeks, you can use your credit card and pay for like a special spray to unwither your crops, right? So it's like, what is this actually teaching us? Is that we can use technology and money to solve our problems instead of actually dealing with it, right? So, you know, in the upper left-hand corner, you can have your own open pit mine in Farmtown. And the upper right ones are Chinese games, so you have Happy Farm and Happy Factory. And then there's McDonald's. So if you play Farmville, you get all these corporate sponsors that are invested in promoting their wholesome food products, like McDonald's and Stouffer's. So my favorite thing was that you can actually have a Stouffer's macaroni and cheese tree if you play Farmville, and you know, so they reward you with these fantastical things, right? So there are other kinds of games that are trying to do different things, like Spore. Has anybody played? Well, you played The Sims, but has anybody played SimCity before? It's a pretty popular one where you control the growth of a city. So this game actually talks about evolution. You can see like a little bit of the movement, right? It's actually a really scientifically inaccurate take on evolution if you play the game, because there's no consequence for player death, which, if you know anything about evolution, that's kind of problematic, right? But it is interesting in terms of being able to go through all these different scales. So you evolve onto land, and you can create your own creature, and you can find a mate and have babies. And then you kind of evolve into a tribe. And then the last stage, which is the most extensive, is you develop and fly into space and start conquering and going into other civilizations, right? So I'm sorry, I'm just going to keep going past a lot of these. Another game that I write about that is interesting when I talked about was Flower, and so you can maybe see a little bit of this, but this is a game where you don't have points, you don't die, you don't have to worry about getting zapped or shot at, right? And in fact, you don't even have a visible avatar, so you're not a human, you just play the wind. And all you do in the game is basically swoop around and you visit unopened flowers, and when you visit them, they open up and you take one of their petals. So you can see this game was actually inspired by the designers moving from Shanghai to Southern California, Santa Monica. And so these landscapes look a lot like California, right? And so you actually end up restoring these landscapes by visiting them. And then the final thing I'll just point to is one of the very early kind of text adventure games called Adventure. Is a game that was actually based on a real location, and I think we could have more of these kinds of games that actually are in real places and not just fantasy places. And you could say Fallout, right? Fallout series that actually took place in DC or other places. But this one actually is based on the Mammoth Caves, the longest cave system in the world in Kentucky, right? And there's all this kind of urban legend about if you play the game well enough and you know the game well enough, you can go to the actual caves and go spelunking and navigate through them because you play the game so well, and the textual description gives you all the clues that you need to navigate the cave, right? So just to point to these interesting things that are happening. So I guess we have about a minute. Does anybody want to just ask questions or kind of reflect at all about, is this interesting to you to think about games in this way? Has it kind of opened up a perspective that wasn't available to you before? Or are you thinking, ugh, I just want to play games and just have fun and not worry about social change? Right? Is it kind of like, are you resisting that? Yeah.
What's your favorite video game?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I have spent way too many hours playing World of Warcraft and EverQuest, so I really like the massively multiplayer online games, RPGs. But that's because I also grew up reading fantasy and science fiction, so for me it's like, it's fun. You get to actually socialize with your friends. So think about these things, don't dismiss games, think about them as storytelling, as art, as actually making arguments, right? And if you ever have questions, please feel free to come see me. All right. Thanks, guys, bye. Maybe come back.